You wanna grow and go and get there. Sometimes upward, sometimes nowhere. You've got the ideas, you're looking up at the clouds. But how do you start standing out of the crowd? So build it with us from the ground up.
Hey everybody, I'm Zach Conway. I'm here with Kelsey McKenna. This is From the Ground Up. What's going on, Kelsey?
Not much. Thanks for getting my name right this time.
I nailed it. Yeah, I've messed it up quite a few times, but
it's a tricky name, McKenna.
We did it that time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it should be pretty straightforward. So excited to be here. What are we covering today? What are we diving into?
We are going to talk about growth. So lately, I've been having so many conversations with advisors, like a lot of conversations, as you know, which I really enjoy talking to advisors. And a lot of them, when I first meet with them, they share kind of their business goals and how they think Seeds fits into their business and what they're trying to do. And so many of them are focused on just creating sustainable growth for their business and organic growth usually. So it's usually a goal. They come in saying they want to grow, right? And what they mean is they want to grow in a consistent, sustainable way. So we've been having a lot of, obviously being a startup, we have a ton of conversations about growth and about, how do we build a culture that is going to really drive growth and lead to sustainable, consistent innovation and growth for our business. So that is the topic that we are talking about today.
Growth. It's of course everybody wants to grow, right? Mm-hmm. As a business, you're trying, well, I guess not everybody, but oftentimes you're trying to grow the business. You're trying to make the business bigger. You're trying to have it make more money. You're trying to get more customers, all of those awesome things. And to your point, we hear it all the time, right? Of course, advisors want to grow, mm-hmm. but it's such a sort of buzzword, and then you hear the headline, but there's nothing necessarily behind it. How do you do? So what is growth for you? What does that mean? How are you measuring it? How are you going to get there? All of the details is really what matters ultimately. And so every business struggles to figure out all of those details. And so that's kind of what we wanted to talk about, especially as we say in the startup world and building Seeds. Of course, again, we want to grow too, right? We want this business to be successful. We started with basically nothing. It's just true sort of, pencil and paper vision from the beginning of, hey, we want to go build this company. And of course, we want it to grow, but learned so much along the way of those details, all the things that are really required to try to make that actually happen. And what's cool is now, first of all, of course, we don't have all the answers. We should call that out in every episode. We're learning right alongside our listeners. But we want to share what we've learned so far, right? So the things that we've learned as a startup in what is necessary to get to that growth as you define it, now trying to translate that to really any business, but specifically to advisory businesses. What is necessary, big picture, and then the details to get to, again, whatever you define your idea of growth. So one of the things that, early in building the company that I found that really helped me sort of frame up what is needed, right? Big picture, what is needed to create any form of growth was this basic framework. I think Jeff Weiner is the chairman. I always forget. I think co-founder or founder of LinkedIn. Sorry if I'm not getting that correct. But he's got what he called the vision to values framework. So it's basically this sort of concept hierarchy of way up at the top, vision, right? The big sort of pie in the sky idea for what a company is trying to achieve, right? Really, really big picture. And of course, with startups, a lot of times that's a pretty bold, big idea, right? And then all the way down the ladder to values. So the sort of cultural aspects and how you act and behave as a team that in theory brings that vision to life, right? But then it's everything in between. So that hierarchy of, I think it's vision, mission. I actually wrote it down so I don't screw it up. Vision, mission, strategy. So the how, right? How are you going to achieve your overarching mission as a business? And then ultimately that big pie in the sky vision. And then underneath strategy, what are the objectives? What are the actual tactical things that you need to do within that broad strategy and how, right? And how do you measure those objectives, and be specific on what those objectives are, and when are those objectives going to be achieved, and how are you going to prioritize them, and who's going to do them, and all of the details related to those objectives. And then again, the values, the sort of cultural aspects of how you behave as a team, and you know, what sort of drives you as a team to bring it all to life, which sort of full circle is everything else in that hierarchy, right? So it's ultimately about what I sort of figured out so far is, unless I help really define everything in those tiers early on and communicate it well across the business, we're all just sitting at our desks and doing our day jobs and, you know, getting some stuff done. But, you know, again, if one of the objectives is growth, well, if you don't have all of that context and it's well communicated and everybody's rowing in the same direction, you can say growth all day long till you're blue in the face. In a startup environment, as an advisory firm, it doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything unless all of those things are defined. So yeah, that's what I'm continuing to sort of learn and articulate to the team and update. And that's what I think ultimately drives us forward. So yeah, thinking about and curious your thoughts, Kelsey, on how that gets translated into sort of the advisory world, the traditional RIA firms out there.
Well, I think it would be helpful to kind of like go piece by piece, because this is like a really big idea. And if one of them is kind of, if one piece of that puzzle isn't well defined or isn't aligned with the others, then it really does stunt growth at least in my experience. And I really love to come in. There's been the vision is cast. We have these like we know generally where we're going. I love the translation down that chain and making sure that the people part of all of this is actually in the right place to make the rest of it come to life. Like, that's really where I love to be in any team, whether it's like a startup or a team within a company, or I'm coming in as a consultant. In my whole career, that's been some of my favorite work that I've done has been related to that. So maybe we should just go piece by piece and talk about why it's important and why would it be important to an advisory firm, you know? So like starting with vision and working our way down.
Yeah, let's do that. And I think I'm going to butcher sort of this analogy. I should have reread it this morning before the podcast. But Jeff, in the Vision and Values sort of original post that he wrote, and go figure, he posted it on LinkedIn. It's still out there. People can find it. We'll put it at the end of the podcast as well, so you can just click on it. But the analogy I think he was using was basically, if you're launching a rocket into space, mm-hmm. and you're off on original launch trajectory by half a degree, mm-hmm. and the ultimate destination is obviously tends to be quite far away, then you are going to land nowhere near your original intentions, right? And so then all the hierarchy below that vision
it's all
is
wrong.
You know, and everything else that led up to building the rocket and putting it on the launch pad. Again, I'm sure I'm butchering the way he wrote it in his article, but that is essentially the idea. And so, so getting that vision, and listen, visions are really big, bold ideas. They may work, they may not work, mm-hmm. in general, conceptually, but they don't stand a chance to take flight and be pointed in the right direction unless they're well articulated and all of those things underneath are actually well articulated as well. Yeah. So every piece is important, but to your point, they all need to be very well connected and communicated across an organization. And if they ever change, that needs to be clearly communicated as well, and people need to own where you're headed whenever you make a change.
Yeah. So like talking about vision and why, and just to like further clarifying how it actually comes to life in the organization, like the vision is going to be kind of almost like you're marketing for who you hire, right? Like you're wanting to hire people and inspire people who you've already hired to fit their smaller vision for their own role or their team or their work or their project within the context of this larger vision. So it should be inspiring. It should be big enough to really be cast out years into the future. It shouldn't be, a vision is not a short, quick, objective win or project, right? This is like this is like really where like you live as the founder and CEO at Seeds, right? And where the founders of firms should be living. And of course, when you're small, you're still in the day-to-day, but primarily for everything else to be working and everything else to be going right, it's so important that this is big enough and inspiring enough to really inform the rest of the rest of the chain, all the way down to actual work getting done by each person.
That's it. It's I'm sort of jumping ahead a little bit, but the idea, because you're touching on inspiring team members to really be a part of that bold vision. So that's important for attracting talent, right? It's important for really motivating that talent to be rowing in the same direction and interested in what that bigger picture idea is. Mm-hmm. So to sort of translate that to, as we talk to advisory firms, again, it's very important for me in the Seeds business to make that clear in the hiring process and every day with the team as best as we can to communicate where we're all headed and why, and then again, the how of the strategy. But for advisory firms, we talk to advisors all the time, and they have these obviously very practical, day-to-day functional needs in the business, right? I've run out of time. I need an operational support person to help me process paperwork. I'm, underwater. I need somebody tomorrow to fix this problem, and panic. And without that framework, or even a sort of beginning semblance of that framework, then you drop somebody in the seat who can maybe functionally achieve, those tasks at hand on a day-to-day basis, which is great, right? Of course you need that. That's sort of the default table stakes. You need somebody who can get the job done, but they're not really buying into anything. They're buying into, they're going to be paid to do a job. And there's nothing fundamentally wrong with that. But if you have these bigger goals related to growth, and however you've detailed what that means, you want team members that, again, are not just going to do those functional day-to-day tasks, but what are the objectives next quarter related to what needs to happen in the business, things that need to fundamentally change to achieve that growth that they'll actually participate in. Right? Not get to their desks and do what's on the task list for the day, but take ownership of things that will actually move the business forward. And if that's part of the role, hopefully it is part of the role, people will only lean into that if they're buying into something a bit bigger than filling out the custodial paperwork, for example, or whatever it may be in that sort of, specific role within the team. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, like you just mentioned it, but growth is change, and change is uncomfortable. People are not comfortable in change. So in order to withstand that discomfort as an employee of, oh, my role is changing, we're redefining everything, we're changing this process, we're changing this service offering, whatever it is, we're changing technology. All of those things are uncomfortable, and that is the motivator that's going to keep somebody engaged and make it feel meaningful as they work through those things. If you don't have that buy-in on a bigger vision, it's really hard to keep your employees happy and motivated. And you end up seeing things like, I've experienced this myself, seeing things like employees who feel like they're underpaid or undervalued. And you may feel like compared to market, they're not, but really it's because they were not bought in on the change that they would be asked to initiate and then withstand within their role. It's very different than an organization that is just kind of sustaining the growth that it's already achieved and maybe innovating in certain pockets, but mostly just doing the day-to-day job to keep the business running. It's a very different culture, and it's a very different experience as an employee, for sure.
And what's so interesting is we actually, generally speaking, as humans, like to participate and take ownership in cool outcomes. Go figure, right? What this is all leading toward has some meaning beyond the task at hand. The problem is, so it's not just about defining that big picture vision all the way down to the cultural values and the things in between that we're touching on. It's the letting go part from leadership, right?
It's hard.
I'll let you say for you, I am a control freak.
I think you already called me a
and
control freak on one of the last episodes.
Yes. So going forward, I'll let you say it yourself.
Well known.
But it is so difficult. So it's a little bit of a catch-22, right? As a founder or a leader running a business, we're saying, hey, you really need to go sort of own and define a bigger vision, and then all these sort of subcategories we're touching on. But then you have to let go of it. You have to
step away. Yeah.
You can't dictate every aspect of what's happening in that hierarchy. So if you go down, so again, vision, mission is sort of the tranche below that. It's a bit more tangible, right? Within what you're building.
Yeah, this is what we're doing right now. Yeah, like this is the nearest term place we're landing to get us toward that vision.
That's it. And then the strategy is then the next level down of the how you're going to get there. What is the overarching game plan to actually make that all happen? And that in particular is where the letting go part really needs to happen. And so early in seeds, it was, okay, I know I need to do vision and values, but here's the vision, here are the values at the bottom, here's the mission, here's the exact strategy, these are our objectives, and these are the projects related to those objectives I want each of these team members to go do and report back to me on what the status is. And that doesn't give any, so even though you've defined that big, cool idea, hopefully cool idea, you're not letting them take ownership on getting to that destination with you, right? It's just you're dictating how to do it, why we're doing it, and everything in between. Yeah. So that part's really important. That's the this is oversimplifying, but that's the step 2, right? To give the team members the control, take ownership, and then help you bring it to life.
And I do want to pause on this because I've worked with quite a few leaders. A lot of leaders, I think, are control freaks. And you, by the way, you don't have to be a founder to be casting a vision. You can cast a vision for a department. You can cast a vision for your team. You don't even have to be the manager of the team to do this. I've seen amazing visionary leaders of little project teams, right? So this applies throughout all sorts of teams. But I do think I see all the time this trust cycle happening. I've supported a lot of leaders who kind of came into high change organizations, I will say, and they have this moment where they're like, okay, I'm going to empower the team. I've set the vision. I've said these are the general objectives. Like, you go build the strategy, you execute. They hand over the reins. The team does the first thing, or a team member does the first thing that leader wouldn't have done, and then the leader's like, give it back, like, I can't trust you, and they get very anxious.
That's not how I would have done it.
Yeah, that's not how I would have done it. And there's 2 things going on there. One is like what we talk about a lot, which is calibration. So even if it's like a new team member, there is going to be a period where it's like we have to be really clear with each other, the leader and the team. What am I expecting as the outcome? And if you have a different way of getting to that outcome, that's fine. Leaders cannot be precious. As soon as you hand over the reins, you can't be like, well, only if you get to that outcome in this very specific way. But yeah, there's this trust cycle that has to be built where we're like, oh, that's not exactly how I would have done it. Explain that to me. We're kind of going back and forth and calibrating expectations and calibrating on the outcomes and deliverables and all of that stuff. So there's that. Then I also think on the team side, it can be scary. If you're a leader and you have a team who's been dictated to for years, and all of a sudden you're like, here, take the reins. I expect you to run these projects. I expect you to do these initiatives. That's really scary. So on the team member side, it's also important that the team members speak up. And if they don't feel calibrated, they can ask for more clarity. They can ask for more moments to calibrate those expectations. So I do think that this is where I see it go wrong a lot, is when leaders finally are like, I get it. Okay. Like, go forth, and do this. And then they don't spend the time to actually calibrate for like maybe a month, 2 months, and then they can actually step out and be less involved.
There's a couple. So those are really great points. And to hone in on a couple things. So to your point, in advisory firms. So if you're an advisor and you're thinking, okay, this is now sort of making sense, hopefully a little bit, and you're heading into, a fresh quarter, And okay, I'm going to go define these things. What, as an advisory firm, is our big picture vision, right? If we think 10, 20, 30 year, whatever your sort of timeline of that vision, what is on the other side, right? What is that bigger idea? It's, of course, to serve your clients well, but that bigger, bolder idea. And by the way, it doesn't, not every vision, I think we should call this out too, needs to be the change the world,
No.
big, silly, whatever idea. It can be honed and really be, clear that it aligns with building an advisory firm, but that bigger picture idea. So as you're defining these things, and you're going into sort of bring it back to your team members, to your point, Kelsey, it's making it very clear to them that calibration is totally okay and expected. To very specifically say, I know we haven't run our business this way before. So this is all a little bit scary. I'm saying to you now, you have ownership over your part of the business and what needs to happen to reach the objectives that we're now laying out together. I hope that will ultimately feel good, but it's probably a little bit terrifying because for some amount of time, I've been telling you, hey, tomorrow do this and go do this with this client and set this thing up over here. And this is different. And that calibration, I think my point is just very clearly call that out that, hey, this could take 6 months before we all feel comfortable in this new framework. And I do want you to make mistakes and try to define things and take ownership in your way. And I'm going to give you my feedback. And that's the role of the leader, right? Yeah. It's you come to me with the plan within this framework that we've now established together. And I'll either give you a little bit of a nudge in one direction or the other. And then my job is to get stuff out of your way, is to make sure you can execute on the thing that you've now defined. But anyway, telling your team that, hey, totally normal. This is going to be a little bit terrifying. Totally new way of thinking. I'm a little bit terrified too. And you calibrate to your point along the way to get it as good as it can be.
Yeah, and what we're really talking about when you're saying this, I'm just thinking like this is really like putting a bow on. And I know we didn't go through every single step in this like framework, but when we talk about culture, which is really just the way of doing things in an organization, I think a lot of times, like what we're talking about when in these moments is you're trying to change the culture and saying it doesn't make it so. So saying that you're now going to have a culture of growth because you've now cast this vision and you've handed ownership down to members of your team doesn't make it so. You're going to have to prove it to them over a period of time. So that calibration period is really important. And it's important that you step into that knowing what are those cultural elements? What are the new ways of doing things that we need to be adopting as a team that I, as the leader, am now responsible for holding the standard of? And then you have to hold the standard. If you start slipping back into the old way of doing things especially if this is an existing team that's used to you having a different culture and doing things a different way, it will never work. You as the leader have the responsibility of holding the new standard. So I do think it's so important to sit down and really think like, and we can have a whole episode on this because this is where I get really excited, but what are those elements of a culture of growth? What are the values? But not the values like, here's my value statement, like I have these 4 values. What does that mean? What behaviors are rewarded here? What behaviors are not? What do I expect of my team members? How am I going to hold that expectation? Like it's so, so important because it just totally falls apart. As soon as the leader says, go do this. And then 2 weeks later, they start slipping back into the old ways of treating employees or doing things, or, it just slips right back. It's okay to slip back as long as you acknowledge, hey, I did it again. Like whoopsies, whoopsie daisy. There's an old Kelsey, old person saying that I use.
Weave that into
trying to weave that to every episode. Yeah. So it's okay to do that as long as you acknowledge it. And then you're calibrating. You're still in that calibration period. So that's really what we mean. It's you're reestablishing a culture. It can't be the old culture and then you can't force them to grow within a culture that wasn't growing before.
It's interesting too. So growth is just this broad, everybody wants to grow buzzword statement, and that doesn't have any meaning unless it's well defined, and it's just sort of misunderstood. I think the word culture as it relates to business culture
Oh my God,
is
such a
also
buzzword.
misunderstood. It's such a
Yeah,
buzzword. It's like, I think
drives me
people,
nuts.
advisors or leaders in general in business, it's like our culture is, we do pizza Fridays. I pay for pizza on
Yeah,
Fridays and bring it into the conference room,
yeah.
and I call everybody family.
Hmm.
And it's that sort of those water cooler-esque aspects of culture.
Yeah,
um
and that's not
and that's all
culture.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's all great, maybe fun stuff or whatever interpersonally with your team, but it's not the fundamental most important things that create a really solid good
yeah.
culture. And that's buying into that vision and everything underneath, and
Hmm.
how you're trying to accomplish that as a leader. It's then people feeling like they have ownership over how to get there, right? To
Hmm.
me, that's such a critical component of it. People feel like they're bought in to this idea, and
Yeah,
therefore it's my responsibility and my enjoyment of seeing that success because I'm owning the steps to help
yeah.
accomplish that. Um,
It's also
and then the last
safety.
one,
For sure.
say-
The
it's what?
safety. So like it's so important in a
Yes.
high growth culture that employees feel safe to push back and to fail, because failure is inevitable. A project's going to fail. Something you prioritize isn't going to work. You're going to miss the mark on something, and you're going to argue, quite frankly. There's going to be
Yes.
storming around how to get to the objective. And it's so important that that is established and maintained by the leader. Like, how many times have you and I argued over things? Like, it has to be okay. If you don't have that, it will never work.
No, and those arguments happen in the bad version of the culture, to be like when you don't have
Yeah,
vision of values
like it's a
defined.
totally different version of that argument. Yes.
Yeah, it's that much worse, right? It's okay, I'm the leader that's telling you what to do, right?
Yeah.
There is no bought-in framework that we're
Yeah.
all see and aligned on, and here's the overarching plan that we've all mutually agreed to. It's go do this, go do this, go do this. So if you have really feedback or frustrated feedback in that framework, I don't want to hear it. I've told you
Yeah.
this is what's happening, and
Yeah. Do your job.
I want you to execute. Yeah, do your job.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no room for the mutual feedback and debate
Yeah.
and why don't we do it a different way, because
Yeah.
you didn't start there. You already decided it as the leader. So now they're just arguing from the leader's perspective. They're just arguing with you. They're not
Yeah.
trying to make it better. They're just arguing with
Mm-hmm.
you.
Yeah. Arguing,
Yeah.
it's like arguing, and is that version is arguing. A better word would be like friction or storming or debating. That's more what you're looking for in that culture
Right.
that does prioritize growth, for sure.
Yeah, and listen, to also be clear, as we said earlier, we don't have all the answers, and I'm not I don't get an A+ on this as a leader either. It's
No
really,
way.
really, really hard. And
Yeah.
I think that's maybe inherent in sort of, founder personalities, right? It's
Yeah.
you have a big idea, you want to control it, you want to protect it, and letting you taking a leap of faith to put this in the hands of other people, and then letting them take leaps of faith in saying to you how they feel about certain things and why they feel
Yeah.
certain aspects of the product or the vision or whatever don't make sense. And it takes a lot of mutual, hey, we're in this together mentality.
Yeah.
But it's
But it
hard.
can go wrong. And that's why we should talk about hiring. It can go very wrong. Like, if you don't have the right people in the right seats, you can hand that over and do all the right things, and it will go wrong. So, not to scare people, but
Yeah.
it is definitely a risk that you have to take. And
Well,
there
to
is
that-
mutual trust that has to be built between both
Yeah.
parties.
And to that point, though, again, if it's not established internally on this is the vision to the values,
Yeah.
you're then hiring for function. You're not hiring for
fit.
function plus
Yeah.
fit. Yes.
I heard this
And so-
podcast and it stuck with me. I can't even remember who it was, but it's so how I feel. And you know this based on some of our conversations about hiring, but I would take culture over talent any day. Like, a cultural fit over actual on paper proof that they can do the job. If they can do the job on paper, but they aren't going to fit into the culture, and culture is such a buzzword, I totally get it, but it's also the most, in my opinion, if you're actually thinking of what I mean by culture, it is the most critical aspect of everything. Like everything is built from there because you just can't grow. You can't layer people in. You can't hire properly. You can't establish like KPIs. You get nothing. Like literally nothing works without it.
The way I think about it, and again, I've learned this over time too. It's you're making, it's not binary exactly, but it's sort of like, to your point, are you buying are you really top of the, stack is you're buying for cultural fit, which may mean that the functional thing that needs to get done tomorrow, maybe that person doesn't have the skill set yet, or just the knowledge base to go get it done. So making that trade-off is a investment, but it's typically a worthy investment, because if you do it the other way, oh, this person knows exactly how to click these buttons and do these things and whatever, they fit right into the job description, other than the cultural aspects, then short-term reward, arguably, but not a good long-term investment.
Yeah.
And I think advisors really succumb to that, pretty often, in that, hey, hair's on fire. I can't take on more clients. I've got, too much to do at the end of the year. I'm trying to do RMDs. It's chaos, whatever. I need somebody to get in the seat right now.
Yeah.
And so you're being reactive, trying to get somebody into a role that, again, maybe functionally forever can get the job done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And be fine at doing it, but maybe not that type of person who can be involved and take ownership over sort of the bigger picture vision that we're talking about. So that's an important assessment, when people walk in the door.
And hopefully, if you can hire remote, it's so much easier to find both, to find someone with enough skills to do the job quicker than someone who has no skills, right? You don't want someone who's going to take a year to get up and running, but you don't have to always have the perfect on paper person, I guess is the point. Because if you find the right person who is passionate about the vision, they like the way you're working, they want to build something, and they're not afraid to try something new, to roll up their sleeves and figure it out, that person is going to figure out how to do the job, the elements of the job that they don't know, because they have to bring it to life, to bring the vision to life. And that's what you're looking for, is really that passion and buy-in and personal investment in what you're trying to grow and build. So
we're throwing out a lot of big ideas here. So we'll definitely, like you said earlier, we'll probably break some of this down into some smaller chunks in episodes in the future, but we'll try to land the plane with some a tangible takeaway here for advisors as they think about the next quarter, that they're walking into. So we're talking about hiring, we're talking about how do you grow, all these things as it relates to building the business. But I think the center point here in the conversation is just this framework idea of vision to values. And again, we'll link to it here in the podcast. So I think the takeaway is for advisors, go sit down and think about what's on that list. What is that hierarchy? And again, you can load up it on the screen and read the descriptions of what each is about, and then think about, for your business, for the future, what would you write under those headers? Right? Think about what that might look like. And it may take a month, 2 months to fully define exactly what you think needs to be underneath those headers. But I think that's the takeaway. That's the starting point, to think about what those things are, because ultimately all these aspects that we've touched on, of collaborative culture, how to hire, what growth even means, those are all the branches to this tree, if you will. So what else, Kelsey? Any other sort of takeaways we should add to that list?
No, this is one of my favorite topics. So just, do you have these defined? If you don't, take a stab at it. If you do, assess them and really sit in the seat of an employee or someone you're looking to hire, and how would it resonate with you? I think that's a perfect takeaway.
Love it. All right. Before we get out of here, let's talk quickly about what are we sort of learning and excited about? What's on your list, Kelsey?
Yeah, I mean, I started listening to a bunch of podcast episodes. Claire Hughes Johnson, who wrote a book called Scaling People. So I just bought the book and I'm just starting it. So I haven't gotten too far, but I have listened to multiple podcast interviews with her. And she was at Stripe and Google and kind of built a lot of the people infrastructure to scale those businesses up. So it's as I've mentioned throughout this call, this is something I really get I get nerdy with this topic. So I've actually just started diving into her book, and I'm really excited to learn more from her. But what about you?
That's a really good, legitimate business answer. And I was thinking I was going to have something in that vein also, but I'm pivoting here.
Okay.
I'm really excited for, so we're recording this leading up to Christmas. It'll come out a little later on, but I'm excited for my children to not be as amped up as they are right now. We had, didn't sleep last night. We got kids in the wrong beds. They're not putting their pajamas on at night. It's just, chaos. And there's recitals and holiday presentations, and it's chaos. I love it, but I'm exhausted. So looking forward to enjoying Christmas and then, maybe chilling out a little bit in the new year.
You don't know, Zach and I both have 3 girls. Your oldest is 6, right? So all 6 of our girls are under 6. So you're what, 6'3" and not 1, and I'm 5'3" and 1 with my girls.
Yes.
So we're in a very similar stage of life. And similarly, kids have not been sleeping. They ask me 20 million times a day if they can open presents. There is just so I'm a little ragged. Wheels are falling off. I will say.
The children have not bought into our household vision values.
My vision of a peaceful moment at some point during the day or night.
Sugar overload and the Christmas spirit just break it all apart. So, all right. Well,
it really makes you look back on your parents, right? And think, wow, they really made this feel magical. Like, hopefully it feels magical right now. Because to me, it doesn't feel magical anymore, I will say.
I get it now. It's it's exhausting, but
it's
fun.
Hustle.
It keeps you going.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, if anybody wants to go check out what we're doing at Seeds, go to www.seedsinvestor.com. You can also find us on LinkedIn and X. I think you can also go sign up for our newsletter if you want to really follow what we're doing and stay up to date. We appreciate it, and we will see you next time.